My name is Captain Logan Barrett. I'm 38 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I served as a logistics officer in the United States Army. My last post was at Fort Concord, a major military base in Southern California, where I spent 6 years managing high-stakes operations and international supply chains. I come from a family where the uniform wasn't just a job, it was identity. My grandfather flew transport in Vietnam. My father worked communications during Desert Storm. I grew up believing that loyalty to the mission and loyalty to your people were the same thing. When I was a kid, I'd polish my dad's boots before he left for drill weekends. It wasn't about shine. It was about pride. About knowing he was part of something bigger, something worth protecting. So when it was my turn, I didn't hesitate. I joined at 20 and found my place not on the front lines, but behind them, keeping the gears turning, making sure the right people and the right supplies showed up where they were supposed to. Logistics isn't flashy, but it wins wars. Over time, I learned to navigate the weight of responsibility, the silence of failure, and the pressure of getting it right the first time. You don't get do-overs when you're coordinating emergency supplies across continents. I took pride in that. Still do. For a while, I believed the system had my back. That if you worked hard, showed up early, and stayed late, people noticed. And if they didn't, at least you could look yourself in the mirror. That belief carried me through deployments, promotions, and more nights in cold hangars than I can count. But systems don't have loyalty. People do. And sometimes, the people with the most power have the least honor. It didn't happen all at once. Disillusionment creeps in like rust. Slowly, quietly, until one day, you look around and realize the thing you've been holding up isn't holding you back. What I'm about to tell you isn't a war story. It's a story about a boardroom, about ego, about what happens when someone decides you're replaceable not because you failed, but because you made the job look too easy. I didn't set out to burn any bridges, but when the time came, I didn't let them collapse under me either. I built something stronger, and I walked across it on my own terms. Colonel Sam Whitaker arrived in late spring. Fresh off a high-profile deployment overseas, he stepped onto the base like he owned every inch of concrete and sky. His voice filled a room before his boots did, and within a day, everyone was adjusting to the new energy, some eager, others uneasy. I was standing outside the Logistics Operations Center when he first addressed me directly. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder and barked out to the others. "This is our supply guy, right? Keeps the boxes moving." Then he laughed like he'd just nailed a punchline. I didn't laugh. I'd coordinated joint force operations across 3 continents. I'd solved emergency reroutes in the middle of typhoons. I was a captain with over 15 years of experience, not someone who just counted crates. But I smiled politely, said nothing. Because in the military, the chain of command isn't just structure, it's survival. And sometimes you swallow the small slights to preserve the mission. Still, that moment stuck. Not because of the words, but the weight behind them. They weren't meant to wound, just dismiss. To put me in my place, nice and quiet, out of the way. Over the next week, the change wasn't immediate, but it was clear. Morning briefings I'd always led were suddenly reassigned. Updates I prepared were forwarded through other officers. Once, I offered insight during a supply chain update, and the colonel waved it off. "We'll let the brass handle that," he said. I had spent years building systems that made this base run like clockwork. But none of that mattered now. Not if you weren't loud, flashy, or part of the new inner circle. Behind closed doors, I heard whispers. "The colonel wants fresh eyes. He's shaking things up." Translation: experience had become a liability. Loyalty didn't look good on paper anymore. That was the first cut. It didn't bleed, but I felt it. Not as anger, not yet, just something colder. Like being pulled slowly out of focus, even as everything around me kept moving. The mission was still mine. The job hadn't changed, but the ground beneath it had shifted. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just a new chapter. It was the start of an unraveling. The first time I noticed my name missing from the operations briefing, I told myself it was a clerical error. A calendar glitch, something easy to fix. But by the second week, I stopped pretending. Meetings I'd once led were happening without me. My planning documents were still being used, but they had someone else's initials at the bottom. Officers I'd trained were now quoting lines from my briefs like they'd written them themselves. I tried to raise it gently. Asked the new adjutant if I should be looped into the weekly readiness sync. He blinked, then said, "Oh, thought you were focusing on support tasks now." Support? Like I was an accessory, not the architect. Then came the new mission packet. I recognized every chart, every contingency plan. Word for word. It was mine. Except the formatting had changed and my name was gone. I sat in the back of the next coordination meeting, uninvited but not barred. No one acknowledged me. When I offered a correction on supply chain lead times, the room went quiet, then shifted the topic. There's a particular sting when your voice becomes an interruption. Not because you've changed, but because someone decided your presence no longer adds value. I watched junior officers nod at ideas I'd pushed for months, only now framed in the colonel's buzzwords. Cross-functional synergy, operational velocity, dressed-up terms for work I'd already done. At night, I stayed late, checking reports and routing paths, making sure nothing slipped. Not because anyone asked, but because the system still mattered. The mission still mattered, even if I didn't. Once, late on a Tuesday, I saw my latest efficiency update forwarded by the colonel's executive aide. No context, no credit. Just a message that read, "From the front office. Let's run with this." The slowest kind of betrayal is the kind done with a smile. When no one raises their voice, when everything looks normal on paper, but inside, piece by piece, your worth is being erased. I was still there, still doing the work. But in every room that mattered, I was becoming a shadow. Watching others stand on scaffolding I had built, and no one even looked down. It started with a login error. Nothing dramatic. Just a red banner saying access denied when I tried to open the operations dashboard. I refreshed the page 3 times before calling IT. The tech on the line was polite but vague. Said my permissions had been changed. Temporary, probably. The next day, my calendar was empty. Meetings I'd created, scheduled, maintained for years gone. No cancellations, no emails. Just silence. I walked the halls like a guest in a place I used to own. People nodded, smiled tight. No one asked how I was doing. No one said anything about the shift. I tried to join the Thursday readiness sync. The room was full, the air stiff with rehearsed energy. Colonel Whitaker gave a nod, then looked past me. Someone closed the door. In that moment, I understood. I hadn't been reassigned. I was being erased. Not fired, not demoted. Just pushed into the margins with quiet precision. I opened my inbox that afternoon to find a system-generated note. Your role has been updated. Please contact your administrator if you believe this is in error. I didn't reply, because I already knew. The decision had been made long before that email ever hit my screen. I was still in uniform, still saluting the flag every morning, still showing up, but I'd been cut loose without a single word spoken out loud. Then, the message came, not from command, from the outside. A contractor I'd worked with for over a year. Quiet guy, detail-oriented. We'd rebuilt 2 routing hubs together in record time. His email was short. "Is everything okay? Noticed you weren't on the last coordination call." I didn't answer right away, but something about it cracked through the fog. Someone noticed. Someone outside the game. I wrote back a few lines. Said, I was checking on a few things internally. He replied 10 minutes later. Just wanted to say, things run smoother when you're in the loop. Appreciate the calm you bring. That one sentence hit harder than the rest, because it reminded me of what I'd brought to the table, of who I was before they started pulling my name off the chairs. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, alone in my office, watching the cursor blink on an empty screen. Sometimes the quiet hurts more than the shouting, because when no one says it out loud, you start wondering if it's real. But it was. And every empty meeting invite, every locked file, every glance that didn't quite meet mine, that was proof. I wasn't losing my place. They were taking it, carefully, silently, piece by piece. The first file I saved was a logistics timeline with my name stripped from the author tag. It wasn't revenge, it was record keeping. I created a folder on a private drive labeled Notes. Nothing dramatic, just a space for the things they thought I wouldn't notice. Every email, every Slack thread, every update memo that once carried my initials but didn't anymore, I archived them all. Not screenshots, real exports, with metadata intact. I wasn't planning to fight, I was building a runway. I bought a cheap laptop, nothing fancy, just clean and disconnected from anything government issued. A fresh space, untouched. Then I filed for an LLC. Iron Bridge Solutions. Got the idea from an old deployment briefing where I'd written, "Strength is nothing without structure." I paid for a P.O. box, set up a new Gmail, even ordered a pack of business cards. Just 10. Just in case I chickened out. But I didn't. I created a blank website, a holding page, no services listed, just the name and a line underneath. Reliable solutions for complex logistics. Each night, I added a little more. A capability statement, a brief bio, case studies redacted, anonymized but real. During the day, I smiled when they walked past me. Nodded during briefings I wasn't invited to. Kept my posture clean, my voice level. But inside, I was already gone. What hurt before had turned into motion. I started tracking patterns. When decisions got made, who was copied, who wasn't. I mapped the power lines they tried to cut me out of. I watched Colonel Whitaker fumble through a debrief, quoting one of my old assessments word for word, without understanding what it meant. And I kept building. The contractor reached out again, said he heard a rumor I'd been moved into a support role. Asked if I was taking outside work. I told him not yet, but maybe soon. He replied, "Let me know the minute that changes." That night, I wrote it down. Client 1 pending. I wasn't chasing glory. I wasn't after payback. I just wanted to work with people who saw the full picture, who didn't mistake silence for weakness or humility for inaction. Bit by bit, I reclaimed my time, my purpose, my future. I wasn't sure how the end would happen, whether I'd walk or get pushed, but either way, I'd be ready. Iron Bridge wasn't just a name. It was a signal that I had crossed over, that I'd stopped asking for space and started building my own. And no one was going to take that from me. Not again. The room was colder than usual. Maybe it was just the air conditioning, or maybe it was the nerves. You could feel something brewing under the surface, but no one said a word. Colonel Whitaker walked in 10 minutes late, acting like he owned the room. He gave that same loud laugh, shook hands like a politician, and called the contractor by the wrong name. Twice. I sat at the back, no name tag, no introduction. Just a seat someone remembered to offer at the last minute. My hands were folded, my face neutral. He opened the presentation with a joke. Something about how our systems were so efficient they scared him. No one laughed. The contractor's deputy just glanced at me, eyebrows raised. Then came the slides, full of jargon, buzzwords, and mismatched graphics. Whitaker kept calling the logistics hub a shipping warehouse. He kept talking over their interpreter. The contractor tried to interject, gently, about changes in customs protocols. Whitaker brushed it off, said our side had it handled. He hadn't even seen the new regulations. I knew because I'd written the update. It never made it to him. He started listing projected timelines. All wrong. Missed the fiscal cycle by a full quarter. Claimed we had 5 regional support teams when we'd only had 3 since last year. The contractor shifted in his seat. He didn't say anything at first, just let the colonel talk. The deputy took notes quietly, but his pen slowed. Whitaker flipped to a slide labeled cultural alignment. It was a mess. Misused terms, outdated models. He said something about respecting foreign holidays, then joked about how hard it was to spell their names. That one hit like a slap. I watched the contractor's face tighten. Not angry, just disappointed. And then, the question. Quiet, clear, direct. Why isn't Captain Barrett involved in this discussion? Whitaker laughed, like it was some inside joke. He turned to me and waved a hand like I was a piece of equipment. Said I was there to take notes or support or something dismissive like that. The contractor didn't laugh. He leaned forward, repeated the question. Why isn't Captain Barrett involved? That was the moment. The room froze. No one knew what to say. I could feel every eye on me. My pulse steady, breath even. I looked at Whitaker. He looked back, confused but trying to stay in control. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I waited. That silence said everything, because I wasn't the one losing control. He was. I stood up slowly, not with a shout or a gesture, just a calm rise like I'd done 100 times before. Only this time, I wasn't part of the chain of command anymore. The room quieted. Even Whitaker stopped talking. I turned to the contractor and spoke clearly, without apology. I no longer represent this base. I now consult independently through Iron Bridge Solutions. I'm available immediately. There was a pause. Sharp, heavy. Then the contractor gave a slight nod. No hesitation. We accept. That was it. No back and forth. No questions. Just a quiet agreement between two people who understood what mattered. Whitaker jumped to his feet, his voice louder than it needed to be. You're out of line, Barrett. You're fired. Effective immediately. I didn't flinch. Just turned to him with the same calm I used when flights were delayed, cargo was missing, or tempers ran hot. That's fine. Just so we're clear, you fired the only person who knew what was actually happening with this contract. The contractor didn't look at Whitaker. He looked at me. He asked a single follow-up about process, not loyalty. Please confirm your availability and retainer terms. I answered in 2 sentences. Kept it clean. Focused. Whitaker kept talking, but it didn't matter. The room had already shifted. No one was watching him anymore. The deputy handed me a printed summary draft. Blank space at the bottom where the consulting firm would normally go. I filled it in with my company name, Iron Bridge Solutions. Right there. Black ink, firm signature. As I walked out, Whitaker tried one more line. Said something about consequences. Said I'd regret this. But I didn't even turn around. Because what he didn't see was that I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't slammed a door or flipped a table. I just stopped covering for his mistakes. And when that happened, the truth finally had room to breathe. By the time I reached my car, the first email had already landed. A formal transition notice from the contractor's legal team. All renewal discussions to go through Iron Bridge, effective immediately. A second one followed 10 minutes later. Draft retainer agreement attached. I opened it on my personal laptop, read every word. Steady hands, steady breath. And then I signed 15% of a multimillion-dollar renewal. Mine. Not the base's. Not the colonel's. Just mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't part of someone else's system. I'd built my own, and someone saw its value. I didn't walk out angry. I walked out free. The emails kept coming. Transition documents, project milestones, security protocols, each one addressed to me, not the base. By the end of the week, the contractor had fully shifted operations under Iron Bridge. The base lost access to the renewal folder. Everything they thought they owned now ran through my firm. Internal reviews started almost immediately. Compliance flagged missing reports, outdated approvals, and unauthorized edits. By the second week, Colonel Whitaker was reassigned. No ceremony, no announcement, just a new name on the door and silence in the hallway. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory speech, no scorecard. Just a quiet, steady rhythm of doing the work. Iron Bridge grew fast. A second contract came from a logistics firm in Seattle. Then another one from a partner in Okinawa. I hired 2 former colleagues, people who understood the job the way I did, people who cared more about precision than promotion. One day, a junior analyst from the base emailed me. Just a single line. "What you built works." I stared at it for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because it felt right. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine. I just stopped asking permission to use it. And when I did, everything changed. Because respect isn't given by rank. It's earned through clarity, consistency, and care. I gave all 3 for years. Now, I gave them on my own terms. And somehow, that made them worth even more. The sun hits different through the windows of my office now. It's quiet in here, the kind of quiet that feels earned. No uniforms, no ranks, just clarity. I sit at a desk with my name on the door and a map behind me. Not one drawn for war, but for connection. The lines aren't borders anymore. They're bridges. Months have passed since that last meeting. Since I stood up and spoke without flinching. I didn't walk out with fire in my chest. I walked out with focus. People ask if I regret it. Leaving the only system I ever knew. Turning my back on a base that once felt like home. But I didn't turn my back. I stood in the light. I stopped shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Every day now, I do the same work. Quiet, detailed, human. No politics, no games. Just results. I meet with teams from Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo. They speak with trust in their voices. Because they know I won't let the message get lost in translation. This job, the way I do it, it's not about power, it's about respect, not control. Connection. That's what they never understood. You can't lead what you don't respect. You can't manage what you refuse to understand. I used to think loyalty meant staying silent, staying in line. Now I know better. Loyalty starts with truth. And sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is leave. Not to hurt, not to win, just to build something better. I didn't burn the bridge. I became it. Not because I needed to be seen, but because people still needed to cross.